But the story is that in 1984, the Supreme Court ruled that judges aren't capable of being experts in all these different categories of the economy and society, and that they were deferring a lot of uh, deferring a lot of the decision making to experts in the regulatory state, in the EPA or in the Security and Exchange Commission, all of those alphabet agencies that all report to the president, all in the executive branch. They basically said, when Congress writes a law that's kind of vague, then we're going to let these regulators, these experts, these PhDs and scientists let them be the ones that can define it more specifically. Now, on the surface, that might sound reasonable, right? Who are these judges? How does a judge know how many pollutants there are in any, cubic meter of space, and what's the right number of particulates to measure pollution? Judges aren't going to know that. The experts know that. And no one can be an expert in everything. The Supreme Court, they know the law, but they're not going to be an expert in science. They're not going to be an expert in health. They're not going to be an expert on finance and other parts of the economy. So it sort of sounds right. Okay, but so what happened since 1984? We've seen the executive branch grow and grow and grow. More and more people, bigger and bigger agencies, giving the president of the United States more and more power. And as a result, now we have these unelected bureaucrats that work in these alphabet agencies that are making laws, that are making rules. Interestingly, they're making rules that govern their own behavior. It's like a conflict of interest. Because remember, it used to be that the Congress, the legislative branch, would write the law. The executive branch would enforce the law. And if the law ever needed interpreting, that's what the judicial branch was for. But now the judicial branch has basically kicked that can partly to the executive branch to let them interpret the law, so the executive branch can define all the rules about the scope of the executive branch's own authority. Is that right? It's just like it's the previous Chevron case, in my opinion, distorted the balances of power. Revoking it kind of puts it back to the right, three co-equal branches of government. I think that's a good thing. But it makes you wonder, like, a lot of these individuals that are in the regulatory state, they're not accountable. They're appointed by politicians. Some have political leanings one way or the other. I mean, you might think it's a great idea to have experts in the executive branch make all these decisions, but maybe only if it's your team that's running the nation, that's the president of the United States. I mean, can you imagine Democrats really excited if Trump and his con man and people with alternative facts and lies were the ones that were making these rules? I would hope not. I would hope not. So how did this whole thing come about? Apparently there were some fishermen, and they were being told by one of the regulatory agencies, I don't know, Fish and Game, one of them, that said, well, in order for you to go fishing, you have to bring a federal regulator onto your boat, and you have to pay them $700 a day to monitor what you fish. And they were saying, what the hell is this? This is an abuse of power. This is nonsense. You can inspect my fish when I come off the boat, but I shouldn't have to pay you $700 a day just so you can monitor me and tell me what I can and cannot do. And so that's the case that was brought forward. But there's been a lot of other things, like especially during COVID, we saw so many decrees by the regulatory state. A great example was the eviction moratorium during COVID. We saw regulators who claimed they were trying to control the disease and the spread of the disease, and they took that circumstance and said, well, now we're going to let people stay in their apartments even if they don't pay the rent. And, the landlord, maybe we'll be able to give them some relief in a PPP loan or something, but, they don't have control of this. They can't evict their tenants, even though the lease might be over, they're month to month. Maybe they're a bad tenant, a tenant not paying their bills. And now the landlord has no ability to manage their own property. Was this something that Congress voted on? No, no, it wasn't. It was done by administrators, done by regulators. And this is an example of how the administrative state has grown and grown. It kind of reminds me also of, you remember Ben Sasse? Ben Sasse used to be the Republican senator from Nebraska. I think he's now president of the University of Florida. And I remember he said, he goes, oh, back when I was a kid, I used to watch cartoons on Saturday morning and they had Schoolhouse Rock, and it was, I'm just a Bill. I remember, all those things we learned when we were younger, speaking to people that are, my age, Gen X. And we learned that the way a bill is processed, it's submitted in Congress and it has to go through committee and they vote on it. And then the president signs off on it. And if it requires interpretation, it goes to the judges, to the Supreme Court. We knew back then that, back in the day, the Congress was the politically electrified branch of government. That's where there was debate, vigorous debate on the House floor. This is where there were elections a lot more frequently. The legislative branch was the highly politicized branch. And then it used to be that the executive branch had a very modest amount of power. They had limited power. And then the judicial branch was almost like something that, most people didn't really think about unless there was a really big, important case. But now everything's changed. Congress has abdicated a lot of their authority, and they just let the president make decisions using executive orders and using the administrative state. So the legislative branch has become weaker. The executive branch, since the 80s, has become bigger and stronger. And now the most electrified, politicized branch in the government is the Supreme Court. We're seeing it now. We saw it with the nominations that have been going back, probably going back as far back as Bork in the late 80s. So it's crazy how everything is shifted, and how the original design of way America's government was supposed to be set up is completely warped, completely distorted. And that's leading us to why we are where we are. And now the progressives want to, stack the court. They want to make the court bigger. Rather than 9 justices, they want 13 or they want 17, so they can put more progressives on the court. But then what's going to happen is that at some point, then the Republicans are going to put more conservatives on the court. And it's the same volley. It's going to be going back and forth forever. But yeah, some of these cases are consequential. There's one